What? What? No way, it's not 5:50. No, it's 5:30. Oh, I guess my watch is just dead. Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chav Ches, Daf 28, Daf Koach of Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Friends, today's Daf, we talk about kind of hearing the shofar, and then we continue, I guess, to talk about hearing the shofar, but we talk about some pretty serious sugyas. Mitzvas lav layhanos nitnu. That mitzvahs were not given with the intention, with the intention, whatever. They're not given for us to get benefit from them. That is not the purpose of the mitzvah. And also, then we get to the sugya of mitzvos tzreechas kavanah. Whoa. Wow. Baltosif. Some real serious sugyas over here. So, friends, let's jump in. We're going to start off Chav Zayin Amud Beis, about at the 2 dots, like 5-6 lines from the bottom. So the Mishnah had said, if a fellow blows shofar into a pit or into a cistern, so what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah had said, Im kol shofar shama yotzav, im kol avar shama lo yotzav. So it depends. If he hears the sound of the shofar, so of course he's yotzei, that's what we want. But if what you hear is the sound of the echo, so then it doesn't work. Now, Amr Rav Huna says, Rav Huna lo shanu ella lo osan ha'omdin al svas sabor, aval osan ha'omdin bibor yotzu. So says Rav Huna, when we say this distinction about, well, it depends, are you hearing the shofar, are you hearing the echo? That's really a consideration for the people who are standing on the edge of the pit. Because maybe they're only, if the shofar is being blown in the pit, and they're on the edge of the pit, so maybe the taka only hearing the echo. However, the people inside of the pit, they're able to hear the shofar, and therefore that would be acceptable. There's no problems there. Tani nami yochi, we taka learn in a brisa, hatokelu sochabor, olu sochadus yotzo. That, one second, we have a brisa that says that if a fellow blows shofar into a pit or into a cistern, he's taka yotze, ve'atanan lo yotzo. But what about our Mishnah that says that you taka not yotze? So lav shmamino kidu Rav Huna shmamino. So it's like Rav Huna, that kilu, if you're on the edge of the pit, so then you have to really make sure that what you're hearing is the shofar. You can't be hearing the echo. But if you're in the pit, so then you're yotze. It'll be fine. You're hearing the shofar. There are those who basically say the same principle of Rav Huna, but slightly different. Rather than Rav Huna sort of jumping in and saying straight up that the thing about blowing shofar into the pit is for the people on the outside on the edges of the pit. It's kind of a slightly different journey towards it, which is they ask a question. On the one hand, Tanan hatakelu sochabor olo sochadutz lo yotzo. On the one hand, our Mishnah is saying that somebody blows shofar into a pit or into a cistern is not yotze. V'atanya yotzo. We have a brisa that say that taka you are yotze. Amrufuna lo kasha kan lo osano omdin al svasabor kan lo osano omdin bibor. So comes Rav Huna to answer the question by explaining that it depends. The people who are on the edge of the pit, so they have to really be sure that they're hearing the shofar and not the echo. Whereas the people in the pit, they're yotze because they're hearing the shofar. Omar Rabbi says, Rabbi, shma miktzas tkiya bibor, umiktzas tkiya al svasabor. You hear that, friends? So the assumption for now is that the Baltokeya, the fellow who's blowing the shofar, is in the pit. And he starts blowing the shofar when he's in the pit. And as he's blowing, he kind of comes out of the pit. So the first part of the shofar, you're hearing while the fellow is still in the pit. But the second part of the blast, you're hearing while he's no longer in the pit. So there's no longer any concern about any echoes or anything. So, Shama Miktas Tkiya Bibor, if you hear part of the blast while the shofar blower, the shofar blaster is, that's nice, a shofar blaster. Alright. While he's in the pit, and then he kind of climbs out of it, and then the second part of the blast you hear while he's outside of the pit, so you're hearing a nice clear blast. So yotza, so you taka yotze. But Miktas tkiya kodem she'ala omud hashachar, miktas tkiya la'achar she'ala omud hashachar lo yotza. However, if you hear part of the blast before Amud HaShachar, before dawn, and part of the blast after dawn, you're not Yotze. So interestingly, when you hear part of the blast from when the shofar blower is in the pit, and part of it when he comes out of the pit, that's acceptable. Yet when you hear part of the blast before Amud HaShachar, and part of it after Amud HaShachar, that's a problem. Amar le Abaye. So Abaye says to Rabba, I don't understand. Abaye says, I don't understand. When it comes to part of the blast before Amud HaShachar and part of the blast after Amud HaShachar, and we say that you're not Yotze, why? What's the problem there? Well, I'm going to read that again. It must be because we need the blast to be entirely when you have an obligation. Vileka, which is not the case. If part of the blast was before Amud HaShachar, well, then that part of the blast was before you had an obligation. So therefore it's a problem. But Hachanami, if that's the case, here also, by when the shofar blower is in the pit and then comes out of the pit, mid-blow, mid-blast, Hachanami ba'ina kula tkiya b'chiyuva v'leka. But here also, you only have part of the blast within the context of the obligation, right? Meaning if you're standing outside the pit and the fellow begins blowing the shofar in the pit and there's echo in there and it doesn't work and it only is a good blast once he comes out of the pit, so then shouldn't that be similar to when you blow part of the blast before Amud HaShachar and part of it after Amud HaShachar, that we say that, the part from before Amud HaShachar kind of messes things up. So we should say here as well that the part from while the shofar blower was still in the pit should mess up, the entire blast. So the Gemara answers, well, there's an important distinction, which is that when it comes to blowing shofar before dawn, that before dawn is night, and at night there's literally no mitzvah whatsoever to blow shofar. Whereas over here, when the fellow is in the pit, bor makum chiyuvahu lo'osan omdim bebor, that the pit is nonetheless obligatory for whoever's in the pit, right? So meaning, whereas objectively blowing shofar before Amud HaShachar, you're just not yotze. It's just, nothing. There's no mitzvah to blow shofar before Amud HaShachar while it's still night out. When it comes to the pit, it's during the day. There's a mitzvah to blow shofar. Anybody who's in the pit is able to hear the shofar, and that's completely fine. So therefore, in that case, when he blows in, starting in the pit and comes out of the pit, that would be acceptable because it's not like it started in a context where there's no mitzvah of shofar at all. That's not true. There is a mitzvah, just that it wasn't maybe right for you since you are outside of the pit. But as long as he kind of comes out of the pit while he's blowing the shofar, it can work. The Meimer Desavar Rabba, so it sounds like therefore Rabba must hold Shama Sof Tkiya Below Tchilas Tkila. Oh, I did it again, Tkila. Shama Sof Tkiya Below Tchilas Tkiya. Probably the Tchilas Tkiya probably makes me say Tchilas Tkila. Shama Sof Tkiya Below Tchilas Tkiya Yotza. So it sounds like Rabba holds that if you hear the end of the blast, even though you didn't hear the beginning of the blast, right? Even though the beginning of the blast was in the pit, but Lemaisa you heard the end of the blast outside of the pit, so that's fine. Umimele tchilas tkiya below sof tchila, what? Below sof tkiya yotza. Maybe it's a shtickle tongue twister, I don't know. But also if you hear the first part of the blast in an appropriate way, but then you don't hear the end of the blast, also you're yotze, right? Partial blasts seem to be okay according to Rabbah, and therefore when the fellow blows the shofar from in the pit and then makes his way out of the pit, and at least you hear the blast outside of the pit, part of it, so then it's okay. Tashma, come in here. Taka barishona umashach bashniya kishtayim. As we saw, I believe yesterday, that if a fellow, right, they would blow shofar before Malchias, after Malchias, before Zichronis, after Zichronis, before Shofaris, after Shofaris. So if the fellow blew the first tekiah before Malchias, umashach bashniya kishtayim, And then after Malchus, he blew a blast, and he extended it for the amount of time that theoretically could be the equivalent of 2 blasts, which then would theoretically line up with the blast after Malchus, the one for before Zichronis, in Biyado Ela Achas. Nonetheless, it only counts as 1 blast, not as 2. Now, Ve'amai, why? If we're saying that you can kind of, accept partial blasts, well then why don't we Tisalik lo b'tarte? Why don't we just say that this long blast will sort of break up into 2 blasts? We'll consider it as its, separate blasts. We'll take parts of it. So Pasuke Tkiyasa me'adadi lo paskina, to which the Gemara answers, we're not gonna sort of artificially take 1 blast and break it up into 2, kind of for no reason. And therefore, if he just does 1 long blast, we're not going to say, okay, let's just take it and break it up. No, he should do 2 blasts. But we want to argue that in the situation where, there was a difference between the parts of the blast, i.e., if one part of it was in a pit and one part of it is outside of a pit, we could say that the part of it that was outside of the pit suffices. Okay. Tashmaka Minir. A fellow blows a shofar into a pit, into a cistern, or into a big barrel. Im kol shofar shama, if what he hears is the sound of the shofar, so yotza, that's fine. Im kol avarya shama, lo yotza. But if what he hears is the sound of the echo, well then it's not fine, it doesn't work. Ve'amai, but how come? Lepuk betchilas tkiya, mikamedil arbiv kala. So effective Gemara, 1 second, if what we're saying is that part of a blast could work, well then, when the fellow blows the shofar into a pit or into a cistern or into a big barrel, well, there's going to be that, portion of the blast before all the sounds got mixed together in an echo. So if we're saying that even if you hear just part of the blast, even though you don't hear the first part of the blast, but you don't hear the second part of the blast, it works. So then, what's the problem with blowing a shofar into a pit or a cistern or a barrel? You're going to hear, at least at the very beginning, you're going to hear the blast before it all gets mixed together in an echo. So shouldn't that work? So Kika Amar Rabba, so the Gemara sort of changes course a shtickle and says that when Rabba says that a fellow who's blowing a shofar in a pit and then comes out of the pit, and we're saying that that you're Yotze, it's talking about Bitokeya va'ola linafshe. It's talking about the Baal Tokeya being Yotze for himself. We assumed that there's people standing around the pit, and the Baal Tokeya, the shofar blaster, starts blasting in the pit, and then he makes his way out of the pit. And we're saying that the people outside of the pit are Yotze their chiyuv of listening to shofar with this fellow. And we're saying that even though the first part of the blast was in the pit, but the second part was outside of the pit, and that seems to work. Rabbah says, no, that's not what it's talking about. But the Gemara says for Rabbah that that's not what it's talking about. What it's talking about is you have a fellow. The fellow is in the pit. He starts blowing his shofar. He makes his way out of the pit. We're saying that he's Yotze with the blast that he blasts. But if that's the case, then what's the chiddush? Of course he's Yotze. He's hearing it the whole time. When he's in the pit, he could hear it. When he's out of the pit, he can hear it. What's the Havminit to say otherwise? Well, I may have thought to say, Zimnin demapik reshe, v'akati shofar b'bor, v'kom ha'arbiv kala. Well, I may have thought to say that maybe we need to make a gezeira. Maybe we have to be concerned about a situation where you have a fellow who's in a pit, and then he gets to a point, right, where his head is outside of the pit, but the shofar is still in the pit, and then maybe he's not really hearing the sound of the shofar properly. So maybe we should say that even when he starts in the pit, it makes his way out of the pit, it doesn't work. Because there could be situations where his ears are outside of the pit, but the shofar is in the pit, and he won't be hearing well, Kamash Malan, that we're not so concerned about that. And if you start blowing the shofar in the pit and make your way out of the pit, so memele, we're saying it's okay. So, okay, if you're looking for something fun to do next year on Rosh Hashanah, find a pit, find a shofar, and have a good time. Amr of Yehuda says of Yehuda, b'shofar shel ola lo yiska. So let's say you have an animal, a ram, and you set aside this animal to be a korban ola. and then you chop its horn. Lo yiska, don't do that. Don't take your korban ola and just grab its horn and blow it. V'im taka yotza. But lemaise, if you did, so then you're yotze. Okay. B'shofar shel shlomim lo yiska. And what if it wasn't an ola? What if it was a shlomim? And you go and chop the horn. Don't do that. V'im taka lo yotza. And if you do, you're not yotze. In fact, the Gemara, my time ola, my time, I guess. What's the reason for the distinction? Right? We say that by an ola, if I set aside an animal as an ola, and then I chop its horn, and I shouldn't do it, but if I do, if I blow with it, I'm yotze. The same thing by a shlomim, if I chop its horn and I blow with it, I'm not yotze. Why? And for the Gemara, ola bas me'ilahi. Well, a korban ola is subject to the halachos of me'ilah that we've learned about a few times. That you're not allowed to get any benefit from it, any hana'ah from it. And if you do, so then you're going to be over on me'ilah. You're going to be over on me'ilah. You have to bring a korban osher me'ilos, assuming that you did it b'shogeg, by accident. And kevan dima'al ba, and once you are over on me'ilah, once you get benefit from this animal that you had set aside as an ola that you weren't supposed to get benefit. Nafkala l'chulin. So once you are over on me'ilah, so then once you are mo'el, so then it becomes chulin. And therefore you could be yotze the mitzvah with it. As opposed to shlamim delabne me'ilaninu, that shlamim, if you get benefit from them, you are not over on me'ilah. So isurahu dirachiv behu v'lo nafke l'chulin, well then the isur never goes away. So when it comes to an ola that is subject to me'ilah, so once you are mo'il, so then it's no longer a kadshim, it becomes chulin, and therefore you could be yotze the mitzvah if you blow shofar with this shofar of your me'ilah animal, of your ola. But a shlamim, which is not subject to me'ilah, so if you use the horn, it's not considered that you're mo'il, and it doesn't go to chulin, and therefore you're not allowed to use it as a shofar. Maskif Rava. Rava asks a kasha. Emas mo'al. At what point, right, if you chop the horn from the ola, and you blow it, at what point is the me'ilah kicking in? And at what point, and after which it becomes chulin? Levasser de toka, after he blows it. So you blow the shofar, and only afterwards, and by blowing it you are mo'il, and then only afterwards does it become chulin. So kitaka bi isura taka, which means that memele, when he blows the shofar, he's blowing a shofar that is still asur to him. It only becomes chulin after the fact. So Rava argues with Rav Yehuda, which is of course a big deal, because Rav Yehuda was an earlier Tana, Amora. Now, all Amora, there's nothing technically wrong with Rava arguing on Rav Yehuda, but usually the Amoraim are, sort of argue within their generations. But here you have Rava arguing on Rav Yehuda, which is pretty charif. But anyways, he argues on Rav Yehuda to say, echazeh v'echazeh lo yatsa, that whether you're blowing the horn from your shlamim animal or from an ola animal, you're not going to be yotze, because even from the ola, at the time that you blow it, it's still asur, it only becomes chulin afterwards. But then afterwards he says, actually, in both cases you are yotze because mitzvos lab layhanos nitnu. Mitzvos were not given to get benefit from. And even though you're not allowed to get benefit from these animals that you set aside as korbanis, to be korbanis nonetheless, so you're not allowed to get benefit from them, but mitzvos are not about getting benefit. Mitzvos lav le'anus nitnu. Mitzvos were not given to us by the Eibishter for us to get benefit and enjoyment from them. And therefore by us using the horn of these animals to blow shofar, it's not considered that we're getting benefit from, and therefore we could be yotze the mitzvah, because it's not like we're getting benefit from them, we're just blowing out of them for the mitzvah, and we're not, I guess, technically doing anything wrong, and you could be yotze the mitzvah both with the shofar of a ola as well with the shofar of a shlomim, according to Raveh. Omar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, b'shofar shel avodah zarah lo yiska, don't blow a shofar of avodah zarah. V'imtaka yatsa. But if you do blow a shofar of avodah zarah, which is asur ba'ana, so you are yotzei nonetheless, because mitzvahs lav layhanos nitnu. B'shofar shel nidachas lo yiska, v'imtaka lo yatsa. Now, however, if we're talking about a shofar from an ir nidachas, from a city in which most of its people were serving avodah zarah, and now we have to destroy everything, well then you're not yotzei. My time, how come? Ir nidachas k'susimichtas shiure. Like we learned with regard to a lulav from an ir nidachas, that things that are in an ir nidachas need to be burnt, and it's considered already from now like they have no measure, no shiur. And we had said, I think yesterday, that a shofar needs to be big enough that you can hold it in your hand and you could see it on either side of your fist. And therefore, a shofar from an ir nidachas doesn't have any size, and therefore you cannot use it. Rava says, Rava, that if Reuven says, I am not going to get any benefit at all from Shimon, mutur l'skoalo, Shimon can nonetheless blow shofar for him, again, because mitzvahs lav layhanos nitnu, tkiyah shel mitzvah, blowing the shofar mitzvah, because mitzvahs lav layhanos nitnu, it's not considered that Reuven is getting benefit from Shimon. Hamudu ano mi shofar mutur l'skoalo tkiyah shel mitzvah. A fellow who says, I ain't going to get any benefit from this shofar, from a shofar, he could still be yotzei the mitzvah with, by hearing the shofar, because, again, mitzvahs lav layhanos nitnu. V'omar Ravan, says Rava, hamudu ano mi chaveru. If Reuven says, I'm not going to get any benefit from Shimon, maza olav mechatos b'mos hagasham aval lo b'mos hacham. So Shimon can, if Reuven is a tmei meis, and he needs to become purified with mechatos, Shimon could sprinkle mechatos from the parah aduma onto Reuven, and it would not be considered as though Reuven was getting benefit from Shimon, because mitzvah lav layhanos nitnu. However, that would only be during the winter when it's uncomfortable, when it's cold out. So Shimon is only sprinkling on Reuven purely, or Reuven experiencing this sprinkling is purely with the intention of a mitzvah. However, if it was during the summer, where maybe there's also you're cooling down a shtickle, in which case Reuven would be getting benefit in addition to the mechatas that he's receiving, but he would also be getting benefit of cooling down from the water in the summer. So then Reuven would not be allowed to be sprinkled upon by Shimon, because he'd be getting benefit from Shimon. If a fellow says, I am not going to get any benefit from a spring, so in the winter, he can nonetheless go to the mikveh in the spring, because he's only doing it purely to be yotzei the mitzvah. Mitzvahs lav layhanos nitnu, but not during the summer, because in the summer it'll also be refreshing, and you had said that you're not going to get any benefit from this spring, and if you go to the mikveh in the spring in the summer, or I guess technically speaking, going to the mikveh in the spring may not make sense, because a spring is not a mikveh, but anyways, it's a spring. But akoponim, so if you go to the spring in the summer, so that would be a problem, because in addition to using it to purify yourself, you're also getting benefit from it, and you had said that you're not going to get any benefit from the spring. Okay, fine. So that was kind of the sugya of mitzvahs lav layhanos nitnu, that mitzvahs, after all, are not for us to get benefit from them. And therefore, if there's any concern about there being problems when it comes to mitzvahs, because maybe we're getting benefit from them, if it's just the mitzvah alone that we're concerned about, that's not a problem, because mitzvahs lav layhanos nitnu. But we did see, though, from for example, the mechatos in the spring, that if you might be getting additional benefits of, such as if it's refreshing in the summertime, so then that could be a problem. Fine. Friends, now we're moving on to the sugya of mitzvahs tzreechas kavanah. Do you have to have, when you do a mitzvah, do you have to have the specific intention that you're going to be yotzei your chiyuv of doing that mitzvah? You're going to be discharging your obligation of doing that mitzvah when you do it. So, shalchule la'avud Shmuel. So they sent Avud Shmuel, kfo v'achol matzah, yotza. If they force him to eat matzah, he's yotzei. So in that case, he's not eating matzah with the intention of being yotzei the mitzvah. He's eating matzah because he's being forced to eat matzah. So we say, nonetheless, he is Yotze. Kfo Oman. In fact, the Gemara, who's tying him up? Who's forcing him? Ilema Kfo Shade. If you're saying a demon is forcing him, he's been overcome by a demon, and the demon is forcing him to eat matzah, and we're saying he's Yotze. Well, Ve'atanya, we learn in the Brayse, itim cholim, itim shote. That when you're overtaken by a shade, sometimes you could be healthy, sometimes you could be like a shote, a foolish person. When he's healthy, so we treat him as if he's just regularly healthy. And when he's considered a shote, he's like a shote, like a fool for everything. And the implication being, I think, the way I understand it, is that if he's overcome by a shade, by a demon, there are going to be times when he's just completely normal. In which case, well then, of course he's going to be Yotze the Chiyuv Matzah. And at other times, if, when he's overcome by this demon, he's considered like a shote, and Mistama, I guess he's potter from eating matzah, in which case, he won't be Yotze the mitzvah. I guess he doesn't have a mitzvah. So, it's hard to understand what the Chiddush would be if we're talking about that he's been overcome by a demon. So rather, Amar Rashi says, Rashi, Shekfa'u Parsim. That no, the Persians sort of forced him to eat matzah, I guess, and it's the first night of Pesach, and he's being forced to eat matzah against his own volition, and he's not intending to be Yotze the mitzvah of matzah, and nonetheless, even though he didn't have kavanah to be Yotze the mitzvah of matzah, he just was eating matzah because he's being forced to eat matzah by Persians. So nonetheless, he's Yotze. So what does that imply, friends? Who could tell me? It implies mitzvos ein tzreechas kavanah. I do not need to have kavanah when I do a mitzvah to be Yotze that mitzvah. Just like, right, as we see, that he's not intending to be being Yotze his mitzvah of eating matzah. And nonetheless, we're saying that he is Yotze. On my Rave, or we could say Rabba, I guess. On my Rabba zosomeris atokei loshir Yotze. Says Rabba, what does this imply? If a fellow blows shofar, just like as a musical instrument, so then nonetheless he's Yotze, even though he's not intending to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar. He's just intending to play a niggin. Nonetheless, he's Yotze. As we saw, that by matzah, he didn't have intention to be Yotze's chiyuv of achilas matzah, and it works. So here also he doesn't have intention to be blowing the shofar of the mitzvah, but he's Yotze. Pshita, isn't this obvious? Hainuach, it's the same thing. You have a situation where a fellow is doing a mitzvah without kavanah, and he's being Yotze. What's the chiddush? I may have thought awesome. Well, I may have thought to say maybe it's a shtickle different. When it comes to matzah, so the Torah says eat matzah, and he ate matzah. But over here, Taka says a remembrance of a trua. And he's not remembering the trua. He's not remembering the blowing of the shofar. He's just Misasik ba'ama, he's playing a niggin. Komash Malon, that nonetheless even here, even by Zichron Trua, even by the shofar, he's going to be Yotze, his mitzvah of shofar, just by playing a niggin. Amok Sover Rabba, mitzvos and tzreechas kavanah. So what do we see? The Rabba holds that mitzvos do not need kavanah. Okay? Esvei. Abaye. Now Abaye asks a kasha on Rabba. Hayakoi bator, a fellow, as we learned 1,000,000 years ago in Masechta Brachos, Hayakoi bator, a fellow was reading from a Torah scroll. Begiaz mana mikra, and it became time to read Kriya Shema. So he's reading from a Torah scroll, and his mom is reading the parsha. That's what he's up to. He's reading the parsha of Shema, and it's now Zman Kriya Shema, and he's reading Shema in the Torah. Im kivin libo yotze v'im lav lo yotze. So what do we see? If he has kavanah, he's yotze the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. If not, he's not yotze mitzvah of Kriya Shema. My lav kivin libo lotzes. And Mistam, what does this mean? If he has kavanah when he's reading the Torah scroll and he gets up to the parsha of Shema and it's Zman Kriya Shema, it's time to read Kriya Shema in the morning. And we're saying if he has kavanah, what do you mean? If he has kavanah to be yotze his obligation of reading Kriya Shema b'shach b'chov kumecha in the morning, so then he's Yotze. So we say what? Mitzvos tzreechas kavanah. Lo likros. Shigmar says no. But it means if he has kavanah to read, not necessarily to be Yotze the mitzvah. No, he doesn't need to have kavanah to be Yotze the mitzvah. He just has to have kavanah to read. Likros hakakari. What do you mean? Of course he's having kavanah to read. That's what he's doing. He's reading. Bikari le'agia. So my answer is no. It's talking about where he's just checking the Torah to make sure there's no mistakes. He might not even be reading per se. He might be mumbling, whatever it might be. So therefore, the point is, as long as he has kavanah to actually read the words, he's yotzei. He doesn't necessarily have to have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah. Okay, fine. So again, Rabbah says mitzvos ain't tzreechas kavanah. That mitzvahs do not need kavanah. You could be yotzei even if you don't have intention to be yotzei the mitzvah. You just need to have intention to read the words. That's enough. Okay. Tashma coming here. A fellow was walking behind a synagogue, or his house was nearby a synagogue. V'shama kol shofar, and he hears the sound of the shofar. It's Rosh Hashanah, and he's passing by a synagogue, or he lives next to a synagogue, and he hears the shofar. O kol Megillah, or it's Purim, and he hears that they're reading the Megillah. Im kiven libo yotza, if he had intention to, so the question is for what? But if he has intention, so then he's yotzei shofar, he's yotzei Megillah. V'im lav lo yotza. But if he doesn't have intention, then he's not yotzei. My lav, im kiven libo lotzeis. Mistam, what this means is that if he has kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah of shofar or the mitzvah of Megillah, so then he is yotzei, then it works. So what do we see? So again, it sounds like you davka do need to have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah. Lo lishmoa. So no, it just has to have intention to hear it. Lishmoa va'ashama. What do you mean? He just has to have the intention to hear it. He's listening. It says he heard it. So v'chomer ba'almahu, they may have thought it's just a donkey. Right? No, he needs to have kavanah at least to hear it, but he doesn't necessarily have to have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah. Okay, fine. So Rabbah still maintains that mitzvos ain't tzreechos kavanah. You don't actually need to have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah, to be yotzei the mitzvah. It's enough just to have kavanah, to kind of be doing the activity without necessarily thinking about the mitzvah. So for example, to hear the shofar, you have to have kavanah that you're hearing the shofar, not necessarily that you're hearing the shofar to be yotzei the mitzvah of hearing the shofar. Right? You just have to have kavanah that you're reading Shema, not necessarily that being yotzei the mitzvah of reading Shema. Okay, fine. Let's go weiter. Eisvei. Abai asks another kasha on Rabbah. Niskavin shomea v'lo niskavin mashmiya. So if you have a fellow who's blowing shofar, and the listener has kavanah to be yotzei, v'lo niskavin mashmiya, but the blower didn't have kavanah for the listener to be yotzei. Mashmiya v'lo niskavin shomea. Or the blower has kavanah that the listener should be yotzei. However, the listener did not have kavanah to be yotzei. Alright? Lo yotze, we say in those cases, he's not yotzei. Achi iskavin shomea u'mashmiya. In order to be yotzei shofar, the listener needs to have kavanah, the blower needs to have kavanah, everybody needs to have kavanah. Now, bishlama niskavin mashmiya v'lo niskavin shomea. So I understand how Rabbah, who says that mitzvos ain't tzreechos kavanah, that you don't have to have kavanah to be yotzei mitzvah. So I can understand that in the case of niskavin mashmiya, that if the blower had kavanah, v'lo niskavin shomea, but the listener did not have kavanah, you could say, what are we talking about when it comes to kavanah? Kisavar chomer ba'almahu. It means that he did the listener didn't have kavanah, meaning he just thought he was hearing like a donkey braying. So he just thought he was hearing a donkey braying. He didn't even have kavanah to be like listening at all. Forget about kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah. He didn't even have kavanah to be listening. Okay, and that's why he's not yotzei. Niskavin shomea, when we say that the listener had kavanah, v'lo niskavin mashmiya, but the blower didn't have kavanah, what kind of kavanah are we talking about? Heichi mishkachas lo. Lab b'tokei lashir? Doesn't it mean that he didn't have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah, he just figured that he was blowing the shofar for fun? And we're saying that he's not yotzei in that case. That he's not yotzei in that case. So it sounds like what? How else can you explain, right? That when we say that if the blower didn't have kavanah, So what kind of kavanah are we talking about? Mistam, it has to be that he didn't have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah. That he was just blowing like a musical instrument. And it doesn't work. So it's a kasha on Rabba who says that mitzvahs don't need kavanah, but if mitzvahs don't need kavanah, then what's the problem over here with this fellow who's blowing for fun? So well, you could say that it's talking about, well, yeah, he was just playing as a musical instrument, and he had zero intention to actually be, making blasts that are the proper requisite length. And a few times, sure, maybe he hit an appropriate length of a blast, but that he had no intention to be like doing actual shofar blasts. So maybe that's what it means that he didn't have kavanah. But as long as he had kavanah to like do shofar blasts, even though he didn't have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah, maybe that could work. Okay, fine. So Rabbah is maintaining that mitzvos ain't tzreechas kavanah, that you don't actually have to have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah when you are doing a mitzvah. Okay, fine. And all these other things that imply that you have to have kavanah is kavanah for sort of other things, not necessarily to be yotzei the actual mitzvah. Okay, fine. Amalei Abaye. Abaye asks a kasha on Rabbah. Again, Rabbah who says mitzvos ain't tzrichos kavanah. El me'ata yoshin b'shmini b'sukkah yilokeh. So says Abaye, well, if we say mitzvos ain't tzrichos kavanah, well then, let's say it's Shmini Atzeres. Sukkot is over. So I no longer have a mitzvah to be sitting in a sukkah. The mitzvah of sukkah is for 7 days. Now it's Shmini Atzeres. And I'm sitting in a sukkah. Even if I'm not having intention to be yotzei the mitzvah of sitting in a sukkah, because we have to be concerned about Baal Tosef, right? There's a mitzvah of sitting in a sukkah for 7 days, not for 8 days. If you sit in the sukkah on the 8th day with the intention of being yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah, it's Baal Tosef. It's adding on. You're not allowed to add on. So it says Abaye, Rabbah, if you're correct that mitzvahs don't need kavanah, well then even if a fellow sits in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres without kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah, but mitzvahs ain't tzrichos kavanah, I don't need kavanah anyways. Even without the kavanah, I could be yotzei the mitzvah. And therefore, says Abaye, if that's the case, if I sit in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, even without any kavanah of being yotzei any mitzvah, I should still be over on Baal Tosef, which is a lav, and I should get malchus. On my low, to which Rabbah responds, Sha'ani Omer, mitzvos eno over alein ele bizmanon. Rabbah says, no, mitzvos do not require kavanah. So if that's the case, then shouldn't I be chayiv malchus for sitting in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres? No. Because Shmini Atzeres is no longer sukkahs. It's no longer the time for the mitzvah of sukkah. So when am I over on Baal Tosef? I'm over on Baal Tosef if I add, 5 tzitzis on a garment. You're supposed to put tzitzis on 4 corners. You put it on 5 corners, right? Tefillin has 4 compartments. If you add a 5th compartment, right? Lulav is supposed to have 4 minim. You add a 5th species to the lulav. Kilu. These are all examples of when right now I'm supposed to be doing the mitzvah in a certain way and I'm adding onto it in an inappropriate way. But sitting in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, it's no longer sukkahs. It's not the right time for it. I don't have a mitzvah anymore to be sitting in a sukkah. And therefore, Baal Tosef would no longer apply. Baal Tosef only applies during the time that you're supposed to be doing the mitzvah. But on Shmini Atzeres, there's no longer a mitzvah of sukkah, therefore Baal Tosef doesn't even apply anymore. And therefore, Rabbah says that even though mitzvos einon tzrichos kavanah, mitzvos don't need kavanah, in this case, the sukkah is irrelevant because it's now Shmini Atzeres, and you're not going to be yotzei anything. You're not going to be over on Baal Tosef. Most of Rav Shimon bar Abba. Now, Rav Shimon bar Abba taka asks a kasha. Okay, what's the kasha? No. Minayin l'koyin she'olu l'duchin. So if you have a koyin who goes to bless the people, right? The Kohanim, especially in Eretz Yisrael, the Kohanim, they bless the people. In Eretz Yisrael, they bless the people every day. Shlo Yomar, the Kohen shouldn't say, Ho v'nosna li rishus, Torah rishus levarach es Yisrael. Well, since the Torah has already given me permission to bless the Yidden, Osib bracha achas mishali, I'll just add my own original bracha as well. Of course, the Birkas Kohanim is Yivarecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, Yara Hashem panav elecha v'chuneka, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yosim l'cha shalom. That's the Birkas Kohanim. But this fellow says, you know what? I'm feeling inspired. And after all, the Torah has instilled me, imbued me, I don't know, something to me with with the ability to bless the Yidden. I'm going to just run with it. Kagon, for example, Hashem Eloke Avosechem Yosef Aleichem, right? That, for example, he figures maybe I'll add the pasuk of Hashem Eloke Avosechem Yosef Aleichem. So Tamulomar Lo Sosifu Ala Dover. So the pasuk says, no, don't add on to the mitzvahs. So basically, this Brisa is saying that a Kohen cannot add his own brachas to the Birkas Kohanim because it would be Bal Tosef. Now, but over here, Kevin de Baruch le over le Zmane. But 1 second. This fellow, when is he adding this bracha that he wants to make up? After he already finished the Birkas Kohanim, which means that it's no longer the time for Birkas Kohanim. The time for Birkas Kohanim is over. He already blessed the Yidden. Vikatani do Avar. And we're saying that nonetheless, if he adds the bracha, he would be over on Bal Tosef. So we see that even outside of the time, you could still be over on Bal Tosef. Therefore, of course, tying it back into Sukkah, even on Shmini Atzeres, you should be able to be over on Bal Tosef. So it's talking about where he didn't yet finish the Birkas Kohanim when he intended to add his own bracha. But we have a brisa which says that even if it's after he finished, siyim bracha achas. It means that if he finished the first bracha, but there's still another 2 more, and he decides that at that point he's going to add his own bracha, that's why it'll be Bal Tosef. But 1 second. We have a brisa that even says that even if he finished all of the Birkos Kohanim and then he decides that he'll add his own, he's still going to be over on Bal Tosef. So even though he's already done with his brachos and it's no longer the time for the brachos, he's still going to be over on Bal Tosef. Shiny Ocha, to which the Gemara says, no, it's different actually when it comes to Birkas Kohanim because well, a Kohen could do Birkas Kohanim however many times throughout the day. There's no specific amount of time. So in most cases, the Kohen goes to 1 minyan and he does Birkas Kohanim at that minyan, then he goes to work. But theoretically, if there are multiple minyanim, he could do as long as there's people who need to get blessed, he could bless them throughout the day. And therefore, kule yoma zmane hu. Therefore, the entire day is considered to be time for Birkas Kohanim, and therefore, even after he blessed one group of Yidden, and he decides that then he wants to add his own bracha of Yosef Hashem Elokei Avosechem Yosef Aleichem, for example, so he would still be over on Bal Tosef because it's still considered sort of within the time frame of Birkas Kohanim, since he could really do Birkas Kohanim all day as long as there are people who need to get blessed. Uminatema, and how do I know that we make this argument that when there are still people to be blessed, you can go the whole day? So Ditnan, as we learn in a Mishnah, Hanitonim b'matona achas, shnisarvu b'nitonim b'matona achas. So let's say, for example, you have a korban bechor, a firstborn animal, you bring it as a korban. So korban bechor, its blood is thrown on the mizbeach once. So let's say you have the blood of one bechor that gets mixed together with the blood of another bechor. Now, of course, both bechors, the blood is only thrown on the mizbeach once. So they're basically the same category of blood. So, anitonim b'matona achas, sh'nisar b'nitonim b'matona achas. So if you have one, thing of blood that is only supposed to go on the mizbeach once, that gets mixed together with other blood that's meant to go on the mizbeach once. So matona achas. So simple solution, just put it on the mizbeach once. Matan dalid, and if blood that needs to be put on the mizbeach 4 times gets mixed together with other blood that needs to be put on the mizbeach 4 times, matan dalid. So put it on the mizbeach 4 times. Okay, so far pretty straightforward. Now, matan dalid b'matan achas. What if blood that you're supposed to put on the mizbeach 4 times? For example, korban osham, korban toda. So So these, Rashi says, Shlamim, Asham, Ola, Toda, those are all examples of blood that gets put on the Mizbeach 4 times. So if that blood gets mixed together with the blood of, let's say, a Bechor, that you only put on the Mizbeach once, so now what do? Do you put this blood on the Mizbeach once? Do you do it 4 times? If you do it once, you might be doing it too little. Right? You'll be doing it too little vis-a-vis the blood that needs to go 4 times. And if you do it 4 times, you're doing it too many times vis-a-vis the blood that needs to only be put on the Mizbeach once. So either way you do it, you're sort of running into trouble with either Baal Tosef, adding too much, or Baal Tigra, doing too little, taking away from. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yinosnu b'matan daled. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Yinosnu b'matan achas. So Rabbi Eliezer says, put the blood in the Mizbeach 4 times. Rabbi Yeshua says, only put the blood in the Mizbeach once. Omer Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, Hari over al Baal Tigra. Rabbi Yeshua, if you only put the blood in the Mizbeach 1 time, well then you're going to be violating the law of Baal Tigra, of don't take away. And if this blood needs to be put on the Mizbeach 4 times, well then by only doing 1, you're being over on Baal Tigra. Omer Rabbi Yeshua, to which Rabbi Yeshua responds to Rabbi Eliezer, are you over on Baal Tosef? Well, according to you, you're not in much better, quite a better situation, because according to you also, vis-a-vis the blood that needs to go on the Mizbeach once, you're being over on Baal Tosef. You're adding on additional, throwings onto the Mizbeach of the blood, and you're going to be over on Baal Tosef. So Amle Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, Lo never Baal Tosef elek shehu be'atzmo. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Baal Tosef is a problem when it's just it itself. So for example, if you had blood of a Bechor, which you're only supposed to put on the Mizbeach once, and you put it on the Mizbeach 4 times, that's Baal Tosef. But when you have a combination, a mixture of blood that's supposed to be 4 times with blood that's supposed to be 1 time, it's no longer an issue of Baal Tosef because of this mixture. To which Rabbi Yeshua basically gives the same answer in his own defense, which is, okay, well you could say the same thing about Baal Tigra, that it's only a concern about doing too little, about taking away, when it's just one thing alone. So for example, if you had the blood of a shlamim, for example, that needed to go on the Mizbeach 4 times, and you decide you're only going to do it once, that's Baal Tigra. But now that there's a mixture, there's no issue of Baal Tigra. V'odam Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua then continued and says, what makes my argument better, says Rabbi Yeshua, is that kshelono sato avarta al Baal Tigra v'lo asisa ma'aseh biyadecha. That, says Rabbi Yeshua, at least according to me, we had this mixture of some blood needs to go on the Mizbeach 4 times, sometimes some of it goes on the Mizbeach 1. I decided you're only going to put it on the Mizbeach 1. So sure, you have to be concerned about Baal Tigra. But Baal Tigra, right, the violation about taking away, at least I'm not actively doing something wrong. What I'm doing wrong is that I'm not doing enough. But at least I'm not actively doing something wrong. Whereas, Kishenosato avarta Baal Tosef ve'asisa ma'aseh biyadecha. Rabbi Yeshua argues to Rabbi Eliezer that according to you, that when you have the blood of the 4 times blood that gets mixed together with the 1 times blood, and Rabbi Eliezer, you're suggesting that you should put the blood in the Mizbeach 4 times, vis-a-vis the blood that goes in the Mizbeach 1 time, you're being over al Baal Tosef, you're adding on, and you're actually, actively violating something. Rabbi Yeshua says it's much better to be over on Baal Tigra, which doesn't require you to actively violate an issue, a law of Baal Tosef. That would be better than your suggestion, Rabbi Eliezer, which is to do all 4 throwings of the blood, which by doing so you're actively violating Baal Tosef. Now over here, what's Rabbi Yeshua saying? Rabbi Yeshua is saying Rabbi Eliezer, I don't understand. If you put the blood on the Mizbeach 4 times, you're going to be over on Baal Tosef. But But 1 second. What's going on over here? Rabbi Yeshua is saying, look, Rabbi Eliezer, you're going to be over on Baal Tosef. What does that mean? It means, we have a combination here. We have a mixture of blood that's meant to be put on the Mizbeach 4 times with blood that's meant to be put on the Mizbeach 1 time. Meaning that says Rabbi Yeshua, vis-a-vis this blood that's supposed to be put in the Mizbeach one time, when you put all the blood in the Mizbeach 4 times, you're going to be doing additional placings of the blood for the blood of the Bechor, which should only be on the Mizbeach one time. So you're over on Baal Tosef. Now, but once you put the blood in the Mizbeach once, the mitzvah of tzreechas Adam for the Bechor is already done. It's no longer its time. And still Rabbi Yeshua is suggesting that Rabbi Eliezer would be over on Baal Tosef even after the blood for the Bechor has already been done and it's no longer its time. So vikatani de over mishum Baal Tosef. Lav mishum da aminan, is it not because we say kevan de ilu misramele bucha achrino hader maze mine kula yom ezmane? So is it not because we say that, meaning I just suggested a second ago that once the blood of the Bechor is already put on the Mizbeach, so you already, so you're done with the blood of the Bechor. It's over, and yet we still seem to be concerned about Baal Tosef. The question is why? I thought that once the time for a mitzvah is over, there's no longer an issue of Baal Tosef. So it must be that, well, let's say another Bechor comes to the Beis HaMikdash, and now we have to offer that. So of course he would offer it. Meaning, the mitzvah of Bechor is really throughout the day. And therefore, even once you put the blood of the Bechor on the Mizbeach once, it's not technically over yet, because the entire day is really, shaykh to the korban of a Bechor. And therefore, even after you put the blood of the Bechor in the Mizbeach, by putting the blood in the Mizbeach 3 more times, you're going to be over on Baal Tosef, because it's still the time of a Bechor. And therefore, that's how we see this concept that we could then tie in and apply as well to the Kohen who's blessing the people, that even though he's done blessing these people, if more people come, he would bless them too. So therefore the entire day is really the time to bless the people. And that's why he's over on Baal Tosef when he adds his own bracha. Just like by the Bechor, since the entire day, if more Bechors come, you would offer them, the entire day is the time for the Bechor. And therefore even after when you have this mixture of Bechor blood with, blood of a Shlomim, for example, so even once you put the blood of the Bechor on the Mizbeach, you could still be violating Baal Tosef when you throw the blood in the Mizbeach 3 more times, which is what Rabbi Yeshua is responding to Rabbi Eliezer. To which the Gemara says, Mimai, it's not necessarily a proof from here that, from these korbanis, that we would say that the entire day is really shaykh to Bechor, because Dilma maybe kosav Rabbi Yeshua, that Rabbi Yeshua holds mitzvos over aleim afilu shelo bizmanum. That maybe Rabbi Yeshua taka holds that you could be over on Baal Tosef even when it is in its proper time. So it's not necessarily a proof to say that you could be right, that the entire day is the time for a Bechor. Maybe no. Maybe once he put the blood of the Bechor on the Mizbeach, that it's no longer the time for Bechor, but maybe Rabbi Yeshua Taka holds that even outside of the time for the Bechor, even outside of the time for a mitzvah, you could still be over on Baal Tosef. To which the Gemara says, Anan hachi karmini, and this is what we're saying. Rav Shimon bar Abba, my time was shavik masnisinu mosav mi braisa. As we've seen a few times, if you have the option to bring a question from a Mishnah or from a braisa, a Mishnah is a stronger question. Right? Even though, yes, Mishnayos and Brises and Toseftas, they're all Tanoim and they're all sort of very, they essentially bear the same weight in terms of the opinion of Tanoim. However, there still is sort of a level of strength, which is that an argument from a Mishnah is going to be a stronger argument than an argument from a Brisa. And therefore we want to know, Rav Shimon bar Abba asked the Kasha against Rabbah. What did Rabbah say? Rabbah said that mitzvahs don't need kavanah. And then we asked the Kasha, what about the sukkah? If they don't need kavanah, you should be chayiv malchus for sitting in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. To which we say, yes, but sukkah is outside of its proper time. Sukkah is over already. It's no longer its time, therefore we're not concerned about Baal Tosef. To which Rav Shimon bar Abba asked a Kasha from a Brisa. That, by the Birkas Kohanim. That even though he's done with the brachas, he's still going to be over on Baal Tosef. Now the question is, why did Reb Shimon bar Abba ask his question from that brisa? Why didn't he ask the question from this Mishnah? That once you put the blood of the Bechor on the Mizbeach, you're already done with the Bechor, and still were concerned about Baal Tosef. So why was Rav Shem bar Abba asking this question from a Brisa, from the Birkas Kohanim, if he could have asked this question from this Mishnah by the blood of the Bechor that gets mixed together with the blood of the other animals? So Rav Shem bar Abba, I'm going to read that again. My time is Shavik, Masnitzun most of me Brisa. How come he ignored the Mishnah and instead favored a Brisa? Losiv Masnitzun, it would be better, it would be stronger if he asked the kasha from this Mishnah by the blood. So Masnitzun my time lo mosiv. So how come he's not asking the question from the Mishnah by the blood? Because kevan de ilu misramile buchra achrina ba'imaze mine. Well, since if another Bechor would come, if another Bechor comes to the Beis HaMikdash, so we would have to offer it, because you can't just allow it, you have to offer a korban. So therefore, Kulei Yoma Zimnehu. So therefore we'll say that, therefore that makes the entire day really technically ripe for a Bechor, in which case, maybe that's why Rabbi Yoshua can argue that he's over on Baal Tosef, because theoretically Bechor is all day. But Brisa Nami, but in the Brisa as well, by the Birkas Kohanim, Kevin the Imisrami Tzibura Achrina Adam Mevarich Kulei Yoma Zmane. But you can ask the same question on the Brisa, right? That since if more people come to the base, more Yidden come, so this Kohen will bless them even throughout the entire day. So then you could say the same thing, which is that, then the entire day is Shaykh to Birkas Kohanim, and maybe that's why we have to be concerned about Baal Tosef. So Rav Shem bar Abba would answer you that Hosam lo Sagi de lo Yohiv, that there's a distinction, which is that by the blood, when a Bechor comes to the Beis HaMikdash and you have to do tzreechas Adam for the Bechor, you have to do it. Otherwise it's you can't allow Kachim to go to waste. So therefore, Imamish has to do he has to do the avoda for the Bechor. And that's why you could really definitively argue that the mitzvah of Bechor is all day. And that's why Baal Tosef would be Shaykh. But Hacha, when it comes to Birkas Kohanim, Ibai Mevarich, Ibai Lo Mevarich. That if he wants to, he could bless the people, but if he doesn't want to, he can kind of make his way out of it. And therefore, that is why it's sort of a stronger question from the Birkas Kohanim, because you can make the argument that Birkas Kohanim is not all day, and therefore once he does the bracha, Birkas Kohanim is done, and still he's over on Baal Tosef. That's why it would be a kasha on Rabbah to say that Baal Tosef is not limited to only when it's within the time, because we see from the Birkas Kohanim that even outside of the time of Birkas Kohanim, you could still be over on Baal Tosef. That was the kasha that Rav Shem bar Abba asks against Rabbah. Okay, so we have our question, right? So our question is, on the one hand, Rabbah is saying that mitzvos do not need kavanah. Abaye then asks that, if mitzvos don't need kavanah, so then when you sit in a mitzvah, in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, you should be chayev malchus. To which we say, but that's not the proper time. To which Rav Shem bar Abba says, but we see from the Kohen that, you can argue that even if it's not its proper time, he's still going to be over on Baal Tosef. So it says here Rava, but I think it makes sense to continue with sort of the Rabbah sort of thing, which is Rabbah Omar. So says Rabbah, okay, lotzes lo boy kavanah. Okay, mitzvos you don't need kavanah in order to be yotze, but la'avor, to be violating Baal Tosef, so boy kavanah. So then you have to have kavanah. And therefore, to be yotze the mitzvah of shofar or of eating matzah, you don't have to have kavanah when you're eating the matzah or blowing the shofar or hearing the Megillah. But to be over, sitting in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, to be over Baal Tosef, there you actually need to have kavanah. And if you don't have kavanah, that's why you're not chayev malchus. Okay? But matan domim Rabbi Yoshua dilavor v'loboy kavanah. But one second. But what about Rabbi Yoshua? Rabbi Yoshua was a situation where he didn't have kavanah, right? You have a mixture of bloods, right? Blood that needs to go on the mizbeach 4 times, blood that needs to go on the mizbeach 1 time. So now, once he's puts the blood of the bechor on the mizbeach, he doesn't have, and now he continues putting the blood in the mizbeach if you were to continue putting the blood in the Mizbeach for, like, let's say the shlamim that's mixed in there. So he doesn't have kavanah anymore for the Bechor, he has kavanah for the shlamim. And yet we're saying, Rabbi Yeshua is concerned that you'd be over on Bal Tosef, even without the kavanah. So Elo Amar Rabba, so rather says Rabba, Lotzeis lo boy kavanah. Okay, so again, to be Yotzei a mitzvah, you don't have to have kavanah to be Yotzei the mitzvah. La'avor, and in terms of being over, so bizmanu lo boy kavanah. So if it's at its proper time, such as with the blood, so then even if you don't have kavanah, you could still be over on Bal Tosef. Shelo bizmanu boy kavanah. But if it's not at its proper time, you have to have kavanah, which is why when a fellow sits on this in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, he's not going to be chayiv malchus because he doesn't have kavanah to be yotzei the mitzvah, and it's not its proper time. When it comes to the blood, even though he doesn't have kavanah to be be doing the matadam for the bechor, nonetheless, since it's within its time frame, so then you'll be over on Bal Tosef, and but you don't have to have any kavanah whatsoever to be yotzei a mitzvah. All right, very very interesting. Fine. Amalei Reb Zera the Shammai. Reb Zera said to his attendant, "Ichvu nuskali, have kavanah and blow shofar for me." So what do we see? We say Reb Zera is asking his attendant to make sure that you have kavanah, make sure you have intention when you're blowing the shofar. Alma kosavar mashmiya by kavanah. So it sounds like what Reb Zera is saying, that the fellow who's blowing the shofar needs to have kavanah to be, for the mitzvah, to be motzi, the person who's hearing it. But meisvei, we have a kasha. If a fellow was walking behind a synagogue, or his house was close to a synagogue, v'shama kol shofar, and he hears the sound of the shofar, or kol megillah, or the sound of the megillah, im kivin libo yotza, vim lav lo yotza, and as long as he has kavanah, so he's yotzei. If he doesn't have kavanah, he's not yotzei. But v'chikiven libo may have heyach lo komichaven adaite didei. But now, if what Reb Zera is saying is correct, that the fellow who's blowing the shofar, needs to have kavanah to be motzi, the person who's hearing the shofar. So then when we say that if a fellow lives next to a synagogue and he hears the shofar, so he's yotzei as long as he has kavanah, what about the fact that the fellow blowing the shofar didn't know that this guy, who's walking behind the synagogue or who lives close by, he's not in the synagogue? The person blowing the shofar didn't know that this guy was going to be hearing, and yet we're saying that as long as he himself has kavanah, he's yotzei. That implies that the fellow blowing the shofar doesn't need to have kavanah. So the Gemara says, well, here we're talking about a shliach tzibur, a representative of the congregation who's blowing shofar, that he has in mind everybody. And therefore, even this fellow who lives nearby or somebody walking outside of the synagogue is included in the kavanah of the fellow blowing the shofar, since he has kavanah for everybody. Okay, fine. Tashma, come in here. Niskavin shomea v'lo niskavin mashmiya. If the listener had kavanah to hear the shofar, but the blower didn't have any intention, niskavin mashmiya. If the blower had intention, v'lo niskavin shomea, but the listener did not, lo yotza, so then it doesn't work. Achi iskavin shomea umashmiya. Both the blower and the listener need to have, both the listener and the blower need to have kavanah. Katani mashmiya dumi de shomea. And we seem to be comparing the blower to the listener. Mashomea shomea la'atzmo, mashmiya mashmiya la'atzmo. Vikatani yotza. So it sounds like what we're saying is that, so we're comparing the mashmiya to the shomea, just like the person listening is listening to himself. So the person blowing is blowing for himself, not necessarily he's not necessarily blowing for the other person to be yotzei. And yet we're saying that he's yotzei. So Tanoi, we say it's taka machlokos. Tanoim, the Tanyas, we learn in the Brisa, shomea la'atzmo, umashmiya mashmiya lefidarko. That we have a Brisa that says that a person who's listening could just listen for himself, the person who's blowing could just blow for himself. Reb Yossi says Reb Yossi, but medvar mamur. When do we say this? B'shliach tzibur, that is specifically for a shliach tzibur. That aval b'yachid lo yotza ad she'izkaven shomea umashmiya. That by an individual, the shomea and the mashmiya need to have kavanah. But I guess the shliach tzibur, though, with the congregation, so then he by default he just has everybody in mind. All right. That sounds like a lot of fun. Wow, it feels like it was something like 1,000,000 years ago when we started this daf. Wow, we've had some really long dafs over here, Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Anyways, so way back when we started this daf, so some of the interesting things that we talked about were Mitzvos layhanos nitnu. Right, Rav Yehuda says that if you take the shofar from a ola, so then you could be yotze with it because you'll be mo'il, you'll be me'ila, then it goes to chulin, and it's fine, as opposed to shlamim, where there's no me'ila, in which case it just remains not allowed, and therefore you're not allowed to blow the shofar. Now, Rava ends up saying, wait a second, but ultimately, mitzvahs layhanos nitnu, you don't get benefit from mitzvahs, and therefore, technically speaking, there's nothing wrong there's nothing wrong with using a shofar from like an ola or a shlam, because you're not getting benefit from it anyways. To which we then said other situations where, for example, if Reuben says he's not going to be getting any benefit from Shimon can still blow shofar for him, all for this reason of mitzvah layhanos nitnu. But we did see situations where, for example, if a fellow says he's not going to get any benefit from a certain spring of water, so in the winter he can tovel in it because he's not getting benefit from it because it's cold. But in the summer where it's going to be refreshing, so he should stay away from that spring. Then we got into this very interesting and sort of delicate, intricate sugya of mitzvos, tzreechas, kavanah or not. That we saw that a fellow was eating matzah, so even if he's forced to eat matzah, so he's still yotze the mitzvah, because you don't have to have kavanah to be yotze the actual mitzvah of, right? You don't have to have intention that I'm eating this matzah to be yotze the mitzvah. You can even just be, as long as you eat matzah, it's enough. And then we got into the question about tosef, because Abaye then asks, if you don't need to have kavanah for mitzvahs, so then if I sit in a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, I should be chayiv malchus for Baal Tosef, because even if I'm not having any intention to be yotze the mitzvah, it's still as though I'm doing the mitzvah, and that's Baal Tosef. So Rabbi answered initially by saying, yes, but it's no longer the time, right? It's no longer Sukkos. So I can only be over Baal Tosef if it's actually, the time for the mitzvah. For example, if I put 5 species in my lulav, so I have the mitzvah of lulav, and I'm sort of adding my own things to it, that's Baal Tosef. But over here, Sukkos is over, I'm not going to be over on it. To which essentially then Rav Shem Bar Abba asks a question based on Birkas Kohanim, where if the fellow finishes Birkas Kohanim, then adds his own stuff, he's still over on Baal Tosef even though it's over. So we see that you could still be over Baal Tosef even if after its time. Then we brought in this whole Mishnah, which is a similar situation by the blood of a Bechor that gets mixed together with the blood of, let's say, a Shlamim, right? The point being blood that goes on the Mizbeach once that gets mixed together with blood that goes on the Mizbeach 4 times. Rabbi Eliezer says that you should put the blood on the Mizbeach 4 times and don't be concerned about Baal Tosef. Rabbi Yeshua says just put the blood on the Mizbeach 1 time, rather, right? And don't worry, well, not don't worry about, but even though it could, be a situation of Baal Tigra, of doing too little. But ultimately, what we saw from this comes back to the Kohen, which is that even if he's done with the Birkas Kohanim and the Zman for the Birkas Kohanim is over, still we have to be concerned about Baal Tosef if he adds on his own brachas. So Rabbah kind of revised his approach to ultimately be that, okay, when it comes to being yotze a mitzvah, so you don't have to have kavanah. If you just eat the matzah, even without the kavanah of being yotze a matzah, the mitzvah, the chiyuv of eating matzah, you're still going to be yotze the mitzvah. Now, when it comes to being over on Baal Tosef, if it's within the time frame of the mitzvah, so for example, this blood that gets mixed together, so even if you don't have kavanah to be doing the mitzvah, still you'll be over on Baal Tosef. But if it is outside of the time of the mitzvah, so for example, on Shmini Atzeres, if you're sitting in a sukkah, in order to be over Baal Tosef, then you would actually have to have kavanah. Okay, those were really kind of the biggest sugyas over here of today's daf. That was daf Chavches. I guess Chavches is koach, strength. We really needed a lot of strength to get through that daf. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.